What's up, Kansas Lottery fans? We have a special treat for you today. I am joined by the legendary Wyatt Thompson, voice of the Kansas State Wildcats now for 20 years. Wyatt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, Cory. I'm excited about K-State football these days.
Yeah, lottery fans are excited as well. It's been a great year. It's been a fun year, a roller coaster of a year for sure. So let's hop into it and get talking about it because everybody wants to know more information about the Texas Bowl against LSU. It's just the second time that Kansas State and LSU have met. First time being all the way back in 1980. So for a moment, let's just ignore the expert opinions and the predictions. Let me just ask you as a fan, how does it feel to go bowling again this year after all the ups and downs?
Well, I think after all of the ups and downs, for sure, but also after last year with the COVID year that was so difficult. K-State, we were going to be able to play in a bowl game, but declined at the last moment because of COVID issues. So to fight through that, fight through an off season, get better, have some of those super seniors come back and join us for 2021. It ended up being a little bit of a roller coaster ride. That's a pretty accurate description, but I loved it. They just kept fighting. They were up against it. I think really one of the key factors was the game at Texas Tech when they did not play well in the first half and still came back and found a way to win and then got on a little bit of a roll. So it feels great, honestly. And I guess I'm most happy for, one, the fans of Kansas State because they're so loyal, but also this coaching staff and these players. These players rededicated themselves after last year. They were asked to do a lot more than most in the offseason, and I'm excited for them to have one more opportunity to play.
Yeah, and it's going to pay off dividends too for the younger kids on the team. This extra practice time and everything, it's so important. That's why it's so important to get to the bowl, to the 6-win mark for sure. Yeah. Kansas State, it has not been an easy year though for Kansas State, and coming into the season, a lot of the experts out there didn't foresee this. In fact, Kansas State was only favored in 3 games by ESPN's Football Power Index coming into the season. And the Big 12 media polls had the Wildcats pegged for 7th in the conference. Instead, they're 7-5 and didn't lose a game by more than 13 points all year. What is it about this team that's so special that everybody outside of Manhattan missed?
Well, it's a really good question. I guess I'll start with that. And it's a little bit difficult to answer in some ways and pretty simple in others. And in my 20 years here, what I would tell you is even when Kansas State has had its absolute best teams, they've always been undervalued, always, by whether it's the league's coaches, the media that covers the Big 12, whatever it might be, they're always undervalued. They always seem to, and I'm going back a little bit here with Coach Snyder too, they always seem to exceed expectations. I think that's kind of within the walls of the program, kind of one of the things that they hang their hat on. They know they're not going to be picked high. They know that most people don't expect a lot out of them, and they try to handle it anyway. And for the most part, they do a really good job with that. I hope that answers the question, but at the end of the day, it really is the fact that I think they feel like there's a little bit of disconnect or disrespect or maybe all of the above there, and it's motivational for them.
Yeah, and I think just as someone observing it, I think that chip on the shoulder is almost plays in the advantage, I think, of the team every year. And kind of to jump around the questions a little bit, because it kind of ties into a further down question, was with Coach K. And I believe he's the first coach in Kansas State history to go to 2 bowl games in his first 3 years as head coach. And he's got 13 commits already signed for the upcoming class. He's got some big transfers, which we'll talk about here in a second.
Okay.
And he still has a handful of those kids that have committed, haven't signed yet. But gosh, it's a big class that's looking like it's going to be coming in. And now a January 4th primetime bowl spot. How big is all of these pieces falling into place in year 3? What does that say to you about the program that's being built right now?
Well, let me start with Coach Kleiman, because I don't think it's the easiest thing in the world to follow Bill Snyder, who was a Hall of Fame coach, a guy who did so much for not only Kansas State football, but Kansas State University, the state of Kansas, and all of those kind of things. But I think what I appreciate most about Coach Kleiman is that he came in here, respected what had been done previously, tried to embrace that as best he could, and yet make this his program. And I think he has done that. There are a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences with these two coaches. And I think it proves to you that there is more than one way to do things. He's very consistent, like Coach Snyder, in what he does and his approach. I think he's a player's coach first and foremost. One of the big differences is that, and we all know this, but it needs to be said, Coach Kleiman is more of a defensive mind. Coach Snyder, one of the great offensive minds in the history of the game. So I think Coach Kleiman just said, hey, I've done this a long time, won national championships at North Dakota State. And as he likes to say, football is football, regardless of whether it's junior high or Power 5 or the NFL, whatever it might be. Let's go block, tackle, do things the right way. And that sounds a lot like Coach Snyder at the end of the day. So he's done a really nice job. For him to go through all of the things that he has in the 3 years here, including the pandemic, and still be swimming and fighting like he is pretty good, man.
Yeah, and man, he's got his work cut out for him with this bowl game. It's got to be an almost I mean, honestly, outside of the playoffs, I can't think of a type of team that's harder to prepare for than LSU right now. They have a roster that is stacked with 4- and 5-star talent. They won a national championship 2 years ago, and the recruiting didn't drop off. But no. Ed Orgeron had resigned midway through the season. He will not be coaching in the bowl game. Their offensive line coach, Brad Davis, who's a younger guy, this is his first stint, even as an interim, has taken over as interim head coach. But Brian Kelly from Notre Dame is hovering around the program, assembling a staff. The future, I mean, just such an odd situation for LSU. And it could be a big motivator for them to close out the season because they beat A&M to end the regular season play, a ranked A&M team. You know what? How do you prepare for this game if you're Coach Kleiman?
It's a great question, Cory, because I don't know that there's an easy answer to it. And you covered a lot there. Let's kind of start with where they're at as a program, where Ed Orgeron is fired in basically the latter part of the year. They have an interim coach. They've hired Brian Kelly, who's one of the really, really fine football coaches in the country, gave him a lot of money to go from Notre Dame to LSU, but he's not going to have a lot to do with this bowl game. I think this, in a lot of ways, comes down to how motivated are they to play this game. And I think you nailed it with the fact that just 3 years ago, they were national champions, and they have recruited well. I've told a lot of people in interviews, Cory, that this is a lot like preparing, at least for me, for the broadcast, preparing for a team like Oklahoma or Texas or somebody like that, because they do have such high-level athletes. Now, with all of that said, and here's the funky part, we don't even know who their quarterback's going to be for the most part. Is it going to be Garrett Nussmeier? Is it going to be one of the two walk-ons? I mean, we just don't know. They, like K-State, have had an up and down year, but they're very gifted. And I do think that they will be motivated for this. I think that, you know what, sometimes teams go into these bowls and aren't necessarily as motivated as some others. So to me, that will be a major factor. But make no mistake, this team is playing well at the end of the year. And at some level, that has to be a factor. Now, one could argue that the long layoff between the first part of December and January 4th is a long time, and that's also true. It's also true for K-State. So this will be a game where I think you have a team that has great talent against a team that has a lot of grit. And I think the matchup in Houston is really good. Can't wait for it, man. Hey, K-State will be the underdog, but like we said before, aren't they always? It's just what it is.
Exactly, yeah. And, you know, there's always the two schools of thought about, you know, Jimmys and Joes and X's and O's, those famous quotes. And this is really going to be a game of that, because I'm not trying to disparage Brad Davis at all and the staff at LSU. But, you know, whereas with Coach Kleiman, it's the 3-year, you know, third year, the staff, except for Colin Klein, which is my next question, the staff is there. There's not much turnover. That's full of seniors versus this like kind of, you know, it's going to be a really fun game. I'm personally very excited for the game. And speaking of the staff of Colin Klein, you know, he is the acting offensive coordinator in the game. it's a big opportunity for him, and he is a Kansas State legend. I mean, everybody loves him, right? So do you think this is possibly an audition for him to take over as OC?
I think yes is the simplest answer. I don't know that it's a given that he's going to get the job or not get the job just based on this particular game or this particular game plan or those kind of things. But what I will share with you and the people watching is that, I mean, Coach Kleiman told me this, face to face, that Colin Klein, and this is no shocking revelation here, by the way, is as good a human being as you'll ever meet. I mean, he is a 5-star guy that way. Great person. And I think he's a very, very fine football guy. I think Coach Kleiman is very interested to see how he handles not only calling plays in the bowl, but the preparation, how the young players respond to him through the long wait between the end of the regular season and January 4th when K-State and LSU finally meet. There's a lot on the table there. I just know this, when Colin was a player, and I've said this in interviews many, many times, I don't know that I've ever been around a player that put 120 some players on his back and carried them like he did for K-State in 2011 and 2012. So how much of that, carries over into the coaching part, I don't know that we'll ever really know the true answer to that, but he is a good leader and he's a good football coach. And I expect K-State to do a lot of really interesting things. I mean, it's going to be Skyler's last game. You got Deuce Vaughn on display there. I think both of these teams will be healthy. Not a lot of people have talked about that because through a large part of this season, there's a reason K-State is 7-5 and LSU is 6-6. Health is a part of that.
Yeah, and the big wait before the bowl game is a big chance to get healthy, sure. To mend your wounds and to also, kind of scheme around. You really get a chance to scheme. Because, I mean, talk about how much game film these coaches are going to have to be watching over the next
Well, and that's why you see so many interesting things in the bowl season, Cory. That's a really good point because they have spent the better part of 30 or so days just breaking down everything that each of them do. And so you're going to want to give them some different looks. I think they're expecting different looks, though, because you do have Colin Klein calling the game and not Courtney Messingham. You do have an interim coach there in Coach Davis as opposed to Ed Orgeron. The fact of the matter is, since I'll say it this way, at the end of the regular season, after Orgeron was let go but still coached out, they played differently after that. I think they relaxed. They didn't have anything to lose. They became very, I guess I'll say very aggressive and blitz happy with their defense, and it worked. I'll give you an example. Alabama beat them 20-14, so they can play. There's no doubt about that. And as you mentioned, they beat A&M late. It's a good football team, really talented. Perfect? No, but a really good team.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun game, and I love talking about the bowl game because, like you said, there's so much time to really discuss all the aspects of it, but it's really hard not to look to the future, especially with the announcement this week that Nebraska quarterback Adrian Martinez is going to be transferring into Kansas State, which was rumored for a while. Not to get ahead of the bowl game. I know we're really focused on the bowl game, but sure. Gosh, what does that do? How does Martinez factor into this team next year?
I'll be honest. I really do have to say this. I felt all along like K-State would bring in a transfer quarterback and possibly even a couple, just because they're losing a 6-year, very veteran guy. And the two quarterbacks in waiting, if you will, are still very young. Will Howard has played a lot more than Jake Rubley, that's for sure. Rubley really hasn't even seen the field yet, but he's a 4-star guy and they really like him. And the question would be, can he realistically be ready for 2021? I'm not saying he will or he won't or can't, because I think someday he's going to be a really fine player. But I think that of Will Howard too. Will probably doesn't have the arm strength or the accuracy that Rubley has, but he's big, he's strong, he's tough, he's learning. But I think you had to go out there and get some experience, even if it's for just the 1 year, to get those guys even a little bit more ready to play. I thought it was a good move. Everything I've heard about Adrian is first class. I think he will fit in here very well. And if you just hold me to the fire, I'm going to say, you know what? It's kind of exciting to think about his running and throwing skills with Deuce Vaughn and others. I'm very much looking forward to this bowl game, but I'm very much looking forward to 2022 also.
Yeah, I laughed. I was laughing with some friends about it actually, that Colin Klein must really want to do a good job in this bowl game, because man, having Adrian just opens up a whole new level of attack completely for the Wildcats next year.
Well, here's what I would say to augment that. It's a really good point, because I think Adrian Martinez is going to be at Kansas State in large part because of Chris Kleiman, but also in large part because of the way he hit it off with Colin Klein. You know, the thing that Colin has going for him, and this isn't, you know, I mean, this makes sense. This isn't anything that I just kind of dreamed up or am crazy with. Colin's walked a mile in those shoes. You know, he's been a player. He knows what it's like to be, you know, in Adrian Martinez's shoes, and how hard it can be. We all know the game of football is awesome, but we also know that the game of football is one where the quarterback gets way too much credit when you win and way too much criticism when you lose, right? I mean, that's just a fact of life.
Yeah.
But I do think this is a really good fit for Adrian and for Kansas State.
Yeah, and it's so exciting to have that momentum going into next season, especially if you're able to cap off this season with a big win in the Texas Bowl. And that gets me to my last question here. We haven't done this yet, and I know it's a little cliche, but I have to ask about a score prediction from you, and what do you think the keys to victory will be for Kansas State?
Well, let's start with the keys to victory, okay? I think that's the really big factor here, because let's go back and repeat what you said a moment ago. It's hard to tell with this bowl game because of all of the factors involved, whether it's the coaching changes, the long layoff, you know, a 6-6 team that's very gifted, a 7-5 team that's a lot better than most people think around the country. There's a lot of stuff on the table here. I think the keys are going to be kind of along this line. Which team handles the layoff better? You know, I'm talking about, you know, penalties, mistakes, those types of things. You got to minimize that to give yourself a chance. Then it comes down to, you know, the minds and of the coaches with the game plan, and then those players executing that. I think both will have good plans. It's for me, can K-State have some balance offensively? And can they slow the run game of LSU down? LSU's running back is a really, really good player. He carried the ball 211 times this season. So their preference is to power at you if they can. Now, don't get me wrong. When they had their previous quarterback, who was way good, 27 touchdowns, six interceptions, but they don't have him now. And I just wonder if it's like, okay, we're gonna try to run the ball even more so. I think that's maybe the plan. So there's so much on the table here, and I hope I'm rambling a little bit here, but you have to understand the lay of the land. This is not an easy one to pick. And I think it will be a fun game. I don't think it'll be like major. I don't think it'll be like 48-45, but I also don't think it'll be 10-3. I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle. And I rarely, if ever, pick K-State to lose, and I'm not going to pick them to lose now for this. I think they'll win the game. I think it'll be close, and I'll just, without giving it a whole lot of thought, Cory, I'll say something like 28-24 K-State. I do think it'll be a close game.
Yeah, that sounds it sounds like a good pick. I'm going to go with a bit of a weird score and say like 27-21. Some field goals happen, you know, some drives stall out. I do think it's interesting that you bring up their running game, and that, you know, with an offensive line coach as the interim OC, or not interim OC, interim head coach.
Yeah,
you're probably right. You might expect them to fall back onto that, you know, running game, especially with having an offensive line coach take over.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing, because like with their quarterbacks, they're either going to burn a red shirt unless they get a waiver from the NCAA, which I think a lot of people would look at that and say, that's kind of unlikely. But let's say they do. Nussmeier is a good-looking young player, but he is a true freshman who's played in only 4 games. That'll be a factor whichever way it goes. If he doesn't play, they're down to a couple of walk-ons. That's also a big factor. I think K-State has the advantage there of a veteran quarterback who's played in a boatload of games and started roughly 40 times. That, you know, it matters. Experience matters.
Definitely. And that's why I'm picking K-State as well. I think his experience and the staff and everything. But I agree. I think that there are going to be some explosive plays from LSU that you just go, wow, he's fast. And
oh yeah, they'll have a lot of that. They have really good special teams, all of those kind of things that you would think they would have. And remember, we talked about this earlier. Not that long ago, they were national champions and had one of the best teams individually in a season in a long time. I think there were like 9 or 10 guys that went into the NFL from that team. So they were hugely gifted.
Look across the NFL, LSU pops up on every roster. So it is what it is. But well, Wyatt, I appreciate you talking to us so much today. And it's been a great conversation and just got me excited for more football, really.
Yeah. And you know what? It's a great time of year, isn't it? And I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. And I hope we have a really good bowl season, not just with K-State, but the Big 12 and the playoffs and all of that. It's an exciting time. And what a great opportunity for both of these programs to be on display, I guess, right at the end, right before the national title game. That's really kind of cool too.
That's right. Prime time, January 4th, Texas Bowl against LSU, Kansas State, going for their 8th win of the year. Be a huge game. Wyatt Thompson, voice of the Wildcats. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.